Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Today is 19 January 2026, and welcome back to the Gregory Wright Show. We are live. This is the fourth take. The fourth take. I don't understand what's going on with the YouTube algorithm. Maybe it's the streaming service that I'm using. Of course, it is free, and maybe that's the problem. Maybe I need to invest in better technology that costs a little bit of money so I can have some certainty of consistency while I am live streaming. And what I want to get to is my reaction to Bernie Sanders, who speaks a little bit about the ICE incidents and the protests that are occurring in Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minnesota. I also want to get to this guy named Velshi. He is a journalist. I guess I use air quotes when I use the word journalist to describe this individual. He works for CNN, and I don't think that he is doing his part in tamping down and de escalating the violent rhetoric about what's going on across the nation when it comes to mass deportations. Mass deportations is what President Trump campaigned on. One of the things he campaigned on during the 2024 presidential election, and we are seeing it unfold in front of our eyes. We see rogue judges from all levels across the country gum up the works, try to slow them down through frivolous lawsuits, and 95% of the time end up being overturned by a higher court through the appeals process. What we have to understand that there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation about the deportation efforts and the role that paid protesters are playing in trying to slow ICE operations down, which is a federal crime. You cannot impede law enforcement. And I don't care if it's local law enforcement or federal law enforcement. The laws are already on the books that Congress has written into law, signed by the president, past presidents, that the laws of enforcing our immigration laws are on the books and they're currently being enforced. You may not agree with the way that the laws are being enforced, but they are being enforced nonetheless. Here's a video clip of an ICE agent who is non-white, who is he looks like he's of Hispanic descent, basically telling protesters what's actually happening on the ground. Let's take a listen.
So you're reporting, we're here to arrest a child sex offender. And you guys are out here honking.
No, we're press. We're not
That
honking.
vehicle right there is honking and impeding our investigations while we're trying to arrest a child sex offender. That's who you guys are protecting. Insane. That's what we're doing. My word's not for you. My word is not for you. I don't have to do it. It's insane. How you
Insane indeed. And the purple haired protesters, these beta males that are following these libtards, are obstructing justice, they're obstructing operations. And what we're going to get to next is Bernie Sanders, is what appears to be an address to his voting bloc. And I gotta tell you, listening to this enrages me so much. But let's take a listen.
Thanks very much for joining me. I wish I could cheer you up, but I can't. This is an unprecedented and dangerous moment in modern American history under a president who is increasingly unhinged and every day is moving us toward an authoritarian society with more and more power resting in his own hands. While the situation is frightening, I am absolutely confident that if we stand together and not let Trump and his friends divide us up, we can and will prevail. And the good news is that even more and more Republicans are understanding the folly of standing with Trump on both policy and political issues, as polls indicate that he is becoming more and more unpopular. Let's give Donald Trump credit for being straightforward. Last week, in an interview with the New York Times, when asked about what he considers to be the limits on his own power in terms of international affairs, he said, quote, "Yeah, there is one thing, my own morality, my own mind. It's the only thing that can stop me. I don't need international law," end quote. Trump says he doesn't need international law. And as a result, Trump believes he has the right to attack Venezuela without congressional approval, the right to threaten to go to war against Denmark, a long-standing NATO ally, in order to take over Greenland, and to threaten Mexico, Colombia, and even Canada. In other words, Trump is right. He has no respect for international law, which means that no other country on earth will have respect for international law. As a result, we will move to international anarchy, where any act of violence, for whatever reason that any country or terrorist group thinks is acceptable, will be done. And that is a horrific situation. But it is not just his disregard for international law. It is his contempt for the Constitution of the United States and for the rule of law here at home. He has continued to illegally rescind money that Congress has appropriated for everything from education to climate change. He has denied funding to states that committed the crime of voting against him in an election. He has attacked federal courts that ignored court orders. He has sent FBI agents into a Washington Post reporter's home. He has attacked media, which has not bent the knee toward him. He has withheld funding from universities whose curriculum he disagrees with. He is renaming federal buildings after himself. He is investigating his political opponents, including the conservative chairman of the Federal Reserve, multiple United States senators, and the Attorney General of the state of New York. And he is pressuring states to redraw congressional maps so that his favored candidates win.
This game, you're not ready for it.
Donald Trump does not disagree with his opponents. He is attempting to destroy his opponents. In other words, plain and simple, when you add all of this up and more, Trump is undermining the foundations of American democracy and everything this country has stood for since its inception. And as bad as all of that is, we now have the situation in Minneapolis. An unarmed American citizen, Renee Good, was shot in the head by an ICE officer in broad daylight. Instead of demanding accountability for her killing, the Trump administration's first instinct was to lie, describing her as a domestic terrorist and offering the officer absolute immunity. This, by the way, as you may recall, is reminiscent of how the January 6th insurrectionists were redefined by Trump as peaceful protesters and pardoned. In other words, when people are trying to overthrow the government of the United States violently, they are peaceful protesters, they are pardoned. When a woman is sitting in her car and shot in the head, she is a domestic terrorist, and the guy who shoots her is pardoned. Instead of withdrawing ICE from the city of Minneapolis or reducing its presence because of this horrific act, the Trump administration has instead sent thousands more ICE agents into the city. It is now threatening to invoke the Insurrection Act, which would allow him to bring the United States military into Minneapolis above and beyond the thousands of masked ICE agents who are already there.
All right, I had enough of this fool, right? Before I get into debunking point by point that he made about the Trump administration and the cabinet of very highly qualified individuals that are working tirelessly every day to support his agenda, to support people who voted for him. 77 million voters voted for Donald Trump. They voted for mass deportations. They voted for the defunding of climate change, which I believe is a hoax. Climate change, the wording around climate change, the climate around climate change has been going on since the 50s and 60s. We've had doomsday. The world should have been already been over from some accounts from the 50s and 60s. But we're still here, alive and breathing. I'm here with you. And so while we have paid protesters that are in the streets of Minneapolis and St. Paul and Minnesota, these are the criminals that they are supporting. ICE has been in existence since its inception, almost as long as the America has been established in 1776, right? And so, America has been in existence way before that, but we're not going to get into that. The America as we know it has been in existence for at least from since 1776. And so all these protesters who are paid, by the way, have nothing else to do. They don't have jobs because protesting is their job. They block and impede ICE operations occurring in this area of Minnesota on a daily basis. They set off fireworks. They're blocking ICE vehicles with their own privately owned vehicles to stop the flow of traffic to and from the federal building that's in that area. And ICE is there to get the worst of the worst off the streets of Minneapolis, St. Paul, and Minnesota. The average American that lives in Minnesota that goes to work every day, pay their bills, pay their taxes, they want this. They do not want criminal aliens roaming the streets who attempted sexual assault or conducted sexual assault on U.S. citizens, especially minors. We don't want that. But based on recent DHS and ICE reports from Operation Metro Surge, which began in late 2025 and has resulted in over 2,000 arrests in the Minneapolis area, the worst of the worst refers to illegal aliens with severe criminal histories, including murder, child sexual assault, gang affiliations, and other violent offenses. And so, as of January 2026, at least 1,500 arrests have been made, with highlights focusing on individuals previously released due to local sanctuary policies. ICE would not have to be out on the streets of Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minnesota, if the local authorities cooperated with federal agents to apprehend these illegal aliens who have created criminal offenses against our law-abiding citizens. If they were to conduct a handover at the prisons and jails of these illegal aliens into ICE custody, then it would be a more smoother transition. But since local authorities across the state of Minnesota do not want to work with the Trump administration, they release these criminals out in the streets. And DHS, Christy Nome and Tom Homan and all those guys involved in the roundup of criminal illegal aliens in the state of Minnesota now have to go into the neighborhoods. This is a direct result of local governments in Minnesota not cooperating with federal agents. And so, again, the end result is ICE going into these neighborhoods that are otherwise peaceful, and they're apprehending these criminals. Tom Homan said it over and over again on CNN, MS Now, every mainstream news channel that you can think of. He said it over and over again. If you let us apprehend these criminals from the prisons and the jails, we wouldn't have to go into the neighborhoods. But among these guys are, among these, 13 are confirmed gang members from groups like MS-13, Paez, and Oriental Boys. And then we're gonna get down to the specific criminals. You could. This is a face only a mother can love. His name is Heon Quoc Thai from Vietnam, and he's convicted of murder, arrested as a high priority target during a surge for violent crimes. DHS described him as one of the worst, with a history that includes ignoring deportation orders. We're going to get back to Bernie Sanders, but I just want to show the protesters out there who they are eventually protecting, who they're trying to protect. This is nothing more than misinformation, disinformation on the part of the Democratic Party when communicating to their voting bloc about the reality that is occurring on the ground. Here you have another one. His picture is not provided. This is not the picture of this named individual up here from Laos, but Sridun Pavian, right? Again, this is not a picture of him, but Mr. Pavian was convicted of strong arm, sodomy of children, aggravated sexual offenses, child rape, burglary, fraud, vehicle theft, and drug possession. He had a deportation order since 2018, but nobody gave a shit under the Biden Harris administration. Here you have another guy, this guy facing the camera. His name is Tao Vang from Laos, convicted of sexual assault and sodomy of a girl under 13, as well as procuring a child for prostitution. Deportation order in place since 2006, but nobody cared. Nobody cared other than President Trump to get this guy off the streets. He is now off the streets. Here's this guy from El Salvador, a face only a mother can love, Gilberto Salguero Lavarde, right? Convicted of 3 homicides, deportation orders since 2025, highlighted for multiple murder convictions and DHS releases. The list goes on and on. Here's another one from Somalia. Abdirashid Adosh Elmi, convicted of homicide, right? These are the people that the protesters in Minnesota are rooting for. They do not want these people detained for whatever reason. I think it's Trump derangement syndrome. I think it's a whole lot of other reasons why a sane person will become insane and want these criminals out in the street. Here's another one, Brian Ajan. 24 convictions, including assault causing bodily injury, domestic abuse, public nudity, theft, interference with official acts, public intoxication, and trespassing. DHS emphasized his extensive criminal record as an example of repeat offenders. And if it wasn't for President Trump, he would still be out in the street. Here's another one, Jose Alejandro Alvarado from El Salvador, convicted of sexual assault on a child, arrested for sex crimes against minors in the Minneapolis area, right? Get a good look at this old man. He is now off the streets thanks to President Trump and Kristi Noem and the mass deportation efforts. Abdikani Noor Ibrahim from Somalia. They don't have a picture of him, but that dude was a registered sex offender with 17 convictions, including larceny, vehicle theft, receiving stolen property, forgery, domestic violence, terroristic threats, DUI, intimidation, escape from custody, and property damage. Right? Then we have our last one here. Right? That's about 8 of them so far, but they're far more than that. The mainstream media will not cover this because they are the propaganda arm of the Democratic Party. This guy named Hernan Cortez Valencia from Mexico, convicted of child sexual assault and DUI. He had deportation orders since 2016, but nobody acted on it. Nobody acted on it. And guess what? President Trump was the president in 2017, but I don't think that mass deportations was his first priority. But he had folks from the administrative state and the deep state to stop him dead in his tracks from doing what he's currently doing now in Trump 2.0. Right? So I just wanted to give you that context to where you have guys like this that are not helping. And I'm going to expand this real quick because I want to debunk some of the points that he made. He called the president unhinged. Okay, the protesters out in the streets of Minnesota are unhinged. The people that were rioting during the summer of 2020, destroying businesses, destroying cop cars, destroying personally owned vehicles, starting fires in the middle of the street, those guys were unhinged. No accountability. The protesters are blocking ICE vehicles from moving freely in egress and ingress and egress to and from the federal building, conducting operations. Those guys are unhinged. Throwing rocks and frozen bottled water at ICE vehicles, potentially hurting someone. Renee Good, who is considered a Democratic martyr, would still be alive today if she was not engaged in unhinged activity. Now, Bernie Sanders, he also mentioned polls. He's saying that mass deportations are unpopular with the American public. Well, my first question is who are they polling? If out of a sample of 2,000, you're polling 1,999 Trump the range citizens of the United States, of course, the polling is going to be predetermined in that mass deportation efforts are unpopular. But if the 2,000 sample size likely registered voters were interviewed, if it was 1,000 Republicans and if it was 1,000 Democrats, then the polling results would be a totally different story. We've learned from previous polling efforts during the 2016 presidential campaign. They said that Hillary Clinton was the clear winner during the campaign and during election night. Well, surprise, surprise. She was not. She lost to President Trump during that time, and President Trump became the president of the United States, number 45. He got inaugurated in January 2017. The polls are always wrong, and you have to consider the source. I consider Rasmussen the primary source of any polling that I look at. And then you have to look at the crosstabs to see the demographics and the age ranges and the income data, the education data. So polling is always wrong, depending on the source. And Bernie Sanders should know better. Bernie Sanders is the guy that suffered the same fate as President Biden did during the 2024 presidential election. During the 2016 presidential primary on the Democratic Party side, Bernie Sanders was pushed aside by the Democratic establishment. What do I mean by the Democratic establishment? I mean the Barack Obama family, the Clinton family, the donors who donated billions and billions of dollars over the last 1 or 2 decades to ensure that the Democrats kept power despite failed policies like climate change and men and women's sports. Nobody wants that crap. I know personally I don't want that. People I associate with that's around me don't want that. And Bernie Sanders, he was pushed aside, and Hillary Clinton was installed to be the nominee for the Democratic Party for the 2016 presidential election to run against Trump, or the presidential, yeah, election to run against Trump. Despite the fact that Bernie Sanders was clearly by polls and all the crosstabs, Bernie Sanders was the front runner. He beat out Hillary Clinton to get the job to run against Trump. But what did they do? Much like they did with Biden, they pushed him aside and installed a female that eventually lost against President Trump. And when we're talking about international law as it relates to Venezuela, Noriega was taken down by George H.W. Bush. He didn't get congressional approval before that happened. And when Gaddafi was taken out, there was a regime change there. I forgot what president, under what president that effort occurred, but no congressional approval before that operation took place. So not only is he delusional in terms of the party he is affiliated with, he's an independent, but he's mostly affiliated with the Democratic Party. Bernie Sanders is willing to push all of that aside and still carry water for the same party that pushed him aside in favor of Hillary Clinton. When it comes to withholding federal funding from states who have demonstrated the inability to manage their own state funding collected from hardworking taxpayers in Minnesota, they are definitely not in a position to manage federal subsidies to support their various programs. If you cannot manage your own budget, what makes you think that a state like Minnesota is going to be managing money that's coming from the federal government? So all that is hey, Minnesota, get your stuff together, or any red state, any blue state. Hey, governors, get your stuff together, clean your own house, manage your own budget down to the penny, and then we may resume federal funding to support your programs and get your state and enhance your state's ability to provide safety, security, and support for your citizens. There's no evidence of Bernie Sanders' claim that President Trump or any of his cabinet members are ignoring court orders to cease and desist what the ruling was on at the time. Every time the Trump administration gets sued for their mass deportation efforts, the men and women's sports, and all the things that President Trump ran on during the 2024 presidential election, there's a methodical effort to stop him from providing and delivering on the promises that he made to the 77 million Trump voters that supported him during the 2024 presidential election. But there is evidence of state governors like Tim Walz and Pritzker from Illinois and Gavin Newsom from California ignoring the laws that are already on the books. They said, you know what? I don't care about the federal law that says removing illegal aliens is not only right and authorized, but I don't care about that. I am going to write my own laws in my own state that says I am going to turn this state into a sanctuary state where all the criminals can flock to and then begin harassing and assaulting law abiding citizens who are living there legally. So there's plenty of evidence of ignoring laws that are on the books by state governors who refuse to work with ICE agents, who refuse to work with DHS to get these criminal aliens off the streets. And Bernie Sanders is also talking about President Trump weaponizing the DOJ and all the tools in the toolbox against political opponents. Well, let's not forget the Trump assassination attempt. There's been two of them at least that we know of, and we still don't have clear answers from the Butler, Pennsylvania attempted assassination on Donald Trump's life. And so there's no Democrat that I know of in recent history that that's their lives are in danger in terms of being assassinated or attempted to be assassinated or unable to move around freely because of the threat of assassination. President Trump in recent history is the only one that has been um, enduring the, you know, 34 felony counts, um, impeached twice over a phone call, over a drop of a pen, and I'm telling you, the attack on political opponents have been coming from the Democratic side of the aisle. Now, and when we're talking about fraud and Tim Walls and all these investigations that are being opened for Mark Kelly for seditious acts, those are justified. Those should be authorized. One thing about the internet is that it never disappears unless there's a concerted effort by the administration, by the administrative state and the deep state to erase part of the internet to prevent videos from popping up, which actually show Mark Kelly on national television telling United States troops to ignore potential unlawful orders. They already know that. They don't need to be told. But that's a dog whistle to say, hey, this is not President Trump's military. This is your military. Nothing can be further from the truth. President Trump is the chief law enforcement officer of the executive branch, and he has Title II authorities as president to eliminate programs, eliminate fraud, waste, and abuse, terminate people, federal workers, um, for any reason. And it's up to the individual if they want to contest it in court, but it should not be a public spectacle of why employees from the Department of Education and USAID have to get on national television and cry and sob over powers that the president has vested him in the presidency. You want to talk about gerrymandering? Bernie Sanders is complaining about the Republican Party gerrymandering election maps from state to state, most notably Texas, and I think another state is Indiana. But The Democratic Party has been gerrymandering since the word was created, since the phrase was created. These guys gerrymandered to the point where states like Massachusetts cannot gerrymander anymore. You have about 20 or 30% of the voters that voted for President Trump in Massachusetts but have zero representation in Congress. Make that make sense to me. Undermining democracy is another phrase that he used to describe Trump's administration. The people who are undermining democracy are the seditious six who basically told United States armed service members to ignore President Trump's order. And that was no mistake because those people already view President Trump as illegitimate in the first place. And so anything that comes out of his mouth as far as a lawful order is considered unlawful according to the Democrats in Congress. When you want to talk about Nicole Good, I already kind of said what I said about her. It is a tragic thing that happened to this young lady. I think that she would still be alive today if she really thought about what her actions meant and what the consequences behind those actions were going to be. You do not use a 2,000-pound vehicle or a 2-ton automobile and motion and drive towards a federal agent that is trying to stop you, giving you a lawful order to stop and get out of the vehicle. Why did you park your car perpendicular to the flow of traffic on the streets of Minneapolis? You dropped your child off at school. You should have gone home and made cookies and made the house a home for your kid when he got out of school so he could do his homework under the smell of good food and loving care. But instead, he was brought to tears when he finally found out that his mother has been killed because of something dumb that she did. Nicole Good, I think, was correctly labeled as a domestic terrorist. And you want to talk about insurrection. This is an insurrection. An insurrection is when you stop lawful government operations such as ICE deportation efforts, when you physically put yourself in the way of those operations, you will get pushed out of the way, you will get shoved out of the way, you will get detained, and you will be charged. That's plain and simple. So I'm done with Bernie Sanders. Let's see what uh, Mr. Fetterman has to say about this.
Imagine being able to build an app with your name on it just by thinking about it. Meet Base 44.
The facts and turn down the political temp.
So John Fetterman, before we begin the video, John Fetterman is a U.S. senator representing the state of Pennsylvania. Regardless of what I thought about him back in the day, I think he has more of my respect today than he did a couple of years ago. And John Fetterman is the voice of reason in the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party, much like Bernie Sanders, much like President Biden, John Fetterman has been pushed to the side by the Democratic Party because he is not he's a moderate guy, right? The people who are jumping up and down, screaming about mass deportations, those guys are far left. John Fetterman is a centrist, and you can hear it in the message that he is going to deliver right now.
Turn down the political temperature. Joining me now is Democratic Pennsylvania Senator John Fetterman. Senator, thanks for being here. I just want to say at the outset, you and I had a nice conversation the other day. I was very hard on you on your run for Senate. And I was too hard on you for your run for Senate. You have recovered miraculously. You are an independent, interesting voice, one that I have a lot of disagreement with. But I was wrong about you, and I want to own that publicly. And I'm really glad to have you here today on The Will Cain Show.
Oh, of course. I mean, I understand. I mean, there's we're all in the business, and now it's like, and that's why I want to have a conversation with anyone that's playing it straight, and that's what this is going to be. And I'm delighted to be here with you all today.
Thank you. So you have urged your colleagues to follow the facts when it comes to what's happened in Minnesota. What have you learned? What do you think is the conclusion after you follow the facts?
Well, what I'm seeing is that it was a tragedy. I mean, it's absolutely. I wish it never happened. I think we could all agree on that. But it's really what's happening. It's like we step back, and now where we've brought that to. As a Democrat, when I arrived in the Senate back in 23, it was very clear to me that we are failing at our border. And if you look at the kinds of things that we've had, this has started to happen. This is from the New York Times. That's encounters at our border, and it was skyrocketing. And it's like, that's unsustainable. When you reach almost 300,000 people, that's unsustainable. And we need to, as a Democrat, It shouldn't be unreasonable to want to secure our border and do it in that way. And now let's also talk about ICE. Now, absolutely, again, what happened in Minneapolis was absolutely tragic. And then now, if you think, now this is from the Washington Post, this is the latest statistics. These are people that ICE now are, no, it's like now 67% have criminal charges, pending ones, or that. So that's more than 2/3, of the people. Now there are some people that aren't involved in any kinds of illegal things, but so me, I think two things can be true. Round up all the criminals, deport them. They shouldn't have ever been here, and they definitely have to go. And now I don't want to see more and more things happening in Minneapolis now too. So two things must be true. And I strongly reject the extreme on either side, about this now. So we must be true. And, I watched you earlier in your show. You just pointed out President Obama deported, millions of people, and there wasn't having the same kind of outrage here, here is from Democrats. And
why is that happening?
I think that.
Why do you think Democratic politicians sound so different than they did as recently as President Obama, and certainly very differently than it was under Bill Clinton?
Yeah, I mean, it's, clearly more and more, I occupy more of a difficult space where, I happen to believe that things are true and it's really reasonable thing. And now increasingly that's getting more and more difficult right now if it happens to agree with the president or with the other side in this, very, very polarized kind of time. But, I would rather just be very honest and just kind of play it straight. I would rather be a great, honest senator than one that's just only going to play to just one side. I represent Pennsylvania, the most purple state in the country. I don't just represent Democrats. I represent 13 million Pennsylvanians, and I try to just play it straight. And I have to think I think that's my responsibility.
Senator, what do you think, and if you and I had a long conversation, it would be interesting to explore where our agreement overlaps and where our disagreement diverges. I'm curious, what do you think your and my? There's been some people, even on this channel, that have asked you, would you ever switch over to being a Republican? And you said, no, I'm a Democrat. But I'm curious, why? Like, what do you think, and you don't know everything that I believe, but what would you suspect would be our biggest point of disagreement? What keeps you a Democrat?
Oh, it's just I'm a Democrat, and honestly, if I changed my party this afternoon, my votes really aren't going to change. It's not much different for those things. And now for me, it's again, that's why I'm trying to describe in our more and more polarized time. I try to be the voice of reason, and people stop me in public all the time just to appreciate that. Whether it's a Democrat, and increasingly a lot of Republicans stop me now too. My parents, all my.
Right. So just want to get to a couple of things that was said here. I don't want to get into the question on what keeps him a Democrat or whatever. That's irrelevant. The relevant point here is that John Fetterman He is a senator representing a U.S. senator representing the state of Pennsylvania that does not agree with extreme rhetoric on either side. On either side, we got to meet somewhere in the middle. We have to conduct these mass deportations. We have to get the worst of the worst off the streets of Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minnesota, and we have to turn down the temperature on violent rhetoric. Governors and mayors of sanctuary states and cities, they have a duty to protect their law abiding citizens by getting these criminal illegal aliens off the streets. And so that is,
Families are
I'm in
Republicans.
agreement
I
with
grew up with
John Fetterman, and we're going to move on, right? So we have this Velshi character from MSNBC, relabeled as MS now, and we're going to see what he has to say.
And I were just talking about 1963. In 1963, 250,000 people participated in the March on Washington to advocate for civil and economic rights for black Americans. In 2020, 500,000 people marched to protest police brutality in the wake of George Floyd's murder. In 2017, 5.3 million people marched for women's rights ahead of Donald Trump's taking office for the first time. In 2018, 2.2 million people marched for the stricter gun laws in the wake of the school shooting in Parkland, Florida. In October of last year, 2025, 7 million people marched to protest the Trump administration's increasingly authoritarian actions on No King's Day. And in 1970, a whopping 20 million people marched for a better, cleaner planet on the very first Earth Day. These were some of the largest protests in America, born out of the need to take collective action against something that was gravely wrong in this nation: gun violence, civil rights, police brutality, the warming of the planet, and more. Every one of these moments felt overwhelming at the time. Every one of them began with ordinary people deciding that silence was no longer an option. So why not now? The President of the United States has deployed masked agents of a state-sanctioned, unaccountable paramilitary federal force to patrol the streets of America. Federal officers are terrorizing our neighborhoods, our schools, and our businesses with seemingly full impunity.
All right, so I can't let this guy go on without me interrupting him. Number one, what did you call the riots of summer of 2020? Was that productive? Did that change anything besides changing a few street names to Black Lives Matter and painting streets in D.C.? No, it didn't. Those marches, those protests, the destruction of property, the destruction of homes and businesses. You had police force under 10 walls in Minnesota shoot pellets at citizens that were standing on their front porch as police marched through the streets during the pandemic. If you want things to change, you have to change them through Congress. You have to get folks in there that are going to make the changes necessary to the laws that you disagree with. Throwing rocks, setting police cars on fire, cursing at ICE agents as they're conducting deportation operations is not the way to do that. Yes, it caused disruption, it caused frustration, it causes schools to close down, businesses to close down, and all that other kind of stuff, but that's hurting the local economy. And so we need to be smarter about this. If you want to change the laws, then you have to do it through Congress. And what this fool is saying, I've heard enough. What this fool is saying is that we should continue to resist. We should continue to, hey, there's nothing wrong with protesting, but when those protests become violent, that's when you're going to find out about the consequences of your actions. Thanks for joining the Gregory Wright Show, and I really appreciate your patronage. Like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.